Next, we have our Crosstalk discussion, Hungary as a hub for international industries. As many, perhaps most of you in this room will know, Central and Eastern Hungary has become a growth engine for the continent. Hungary itself has achieved a lot in terms of economic development in the last decade. To discuss why Hungary decided to adopt a foreign policy focused on foreign trade, how this has helped the country to become a major hub for innovative industries in Europe, and how this is perceived from an international perspective. Will you please welcome to the stage Péter Szijjártó, Hungary's Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Professor Dr. Klaus Mangold, Chairman of the Supervisory Board of Knorr-Bremse AG, and Chairman of Mangold Consulting, and our discussion moderator, Hans Kaiser, a former German minister and something of an expert on Hungary. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Go here. Yeah.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am happy to be here in Hungary, in Budapest, which I like so much, I must say it at first. And I should say, I know we have to talk about economics and progress of Hungary, but at first I would like to say, 30 years after the fall of the Iron Curtain and 30 years after the fall of the Berliner Mauer and 13 years after the change, we have to thank so much for Hungary and the Hungarian citizens that all these things, such a development was possible. From my heart, many, many thanks. And I must say, there's a connection between these events because we would not sit here in this room and we would not be able to talk about progress in economics and to talk all these things we could have in this time. Look out, if you are not from Budapest, look out what you can see. It's wonderful, and it's a progress, and it's on behalf such things which were possible 30 years ago. And I say especially thanks Hungary and the courage the Hungarians always in their history had. Thanks once more. Mr. Minister Szijjártó, we heard about success of Hungary in economics and about the chances of the development. Can you say what are the main cases that such a development was possible? And we know that the Hungarians are at the top of the former states of the so-called Ostblock, and they are sometimes better than a lot of the so-called old states of the European Union. Please.
Good morning to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us for today's event, and thank you so much for moderating this panel. Professor, thank you very much for sharing your views with us this morning. Actually, back in 2010, when we entered office, this country was really at the edge of the cliff when it comes to economy, for sure. We had an unemployment rate of 12.5%, a budget deficit of 7%, state debt of 85%, And in a country of 10 million inhabitants, we had 1.8 million taxpayers. So you can imagine the landscape at that time. And we were under IMF program as an addition. And then we have decided to implement a brave type of economic policy, which was called by our friends, between quotation marks, as unorthodox. The goal was not only to survive the crisis, but to be stronger in the post-crisis period. And the key of our economic policy was the introduction of the flat tax system. We have introduced flat tax on personal income immediately, and a couple of years after, we have introduced flat tax on corporate income. And currently, we can offer the lowest tax rates of Europe. When it comes to personal income tax, there's a flat tax rate of 15%, 1.5. And when it comes to corporate, we have a flat tax rate at 9%, the only single-digit flat tax corporate income tax rate of Europe. And I have to tell you that the flat tax system proved to be working. As I told you, we had 1.8 million taxpayers back in 2010. Now we have 4.5 million, which gives you a total different room to make decisions. We have made it very clear that if one wants the state to take care of him or her, must work. That's why we have transformed the subsidy system of the state from cash to tax incentives. So it makes sense to work, it makes sense to earn, and it doesn't make sense to hide. And that was the key, what we introduced. And on the other hand, we have to understand that we are a small country with a very open economy. Our export over GDP ratio is 86.5%. 86.5%. And the FDI stock in the country is currently around 8,600 euros per capita. So it is obvious that the external factors, whether we can attract investors to the country and whether we can help Hungarian companies to export, basically determine the economic performance of the country. So that's why I had a proposal to the Prime Minister almost exactly 5 years ago. That was last Monday that I've been fulfilling this position for 5 years. And it has some coincidence that it's so close to each other. I have proposed to the Prime Minister that given the fact that we are a country of size and capacity, that no one really expects the solution to be offered by us on the crisis of Syria or Libya, let's use our foreign policy structure for a little bit more than saying smart things. And I have proposed to him to merge everything which is in relationship with external economic relations and foreign affairs into one ministry. Now, when you hear the name in English of my ministry, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, has nothing to do with the Hungarian name and the reality. Because the name of my ministry, if it had been translated properly, it has a story why it was not. The proper name is Ministry of External Economic Relations and Foreign Affairs. And sequencing counts. I stick to this sequencing. Because the Hungarian foreign policy must serve the national economic interest of the country. And actually, speaking about this situation, we have 2,000 people in the foreign service. And as I have transformed the whole thing into a system which has to serve economic interest, we immediately had 2,000 additional staff to verify the national economic interest beyond the borders. And since 2014, in the last 5 years, at the end of every year, we have broken the that time export record and that time investment record. And now we are one of the 35 countries of the world which are able to produce above 100 billion euros of export in 1 year. We are number 35 globally when it comes to exports, and we are number 92 when it comes to population. And I think this is the key here.
In the first time I thought, here is the Minister for Economics and for Trade. But I know he is Minister for Foreign Affairs, but now I know why he is speaking as a Minister for Economics and for Trade. thank you for your solution you did. Mr. Professor Mangold, I must say, you have a lot of jobs behind your pension, and now you make a lot for countries in Europe and for countries over Europe. And I'm very happy that you are one of the main men who did a lot, especially for Hungary. And I have the question why you are so engaged, especially for Hungary. I know other countries too, but especially for Hungary.
Yes, I believe there are always two dimensions. One is a dimension which is an emotional one, and the other one is a rational one. For the emotional one, I believe really that I started to fall in love with Hungary when I was a student. And I was at this time traveling many, many times to Hungary. And I believe I have always developed a lot of people with a lot of empathy, with sympathy, with welcoming, with open gesture, and to look forward how to shift a new philosophy from the old world to a new world. And this is, I believe, something where I feel very much familiar when I'm always being in Hungary. This is the first thing. The second is from a business point of view and from a political point of view. Let me make two remarks, Herr Kaiser. The first is from a business point of view. I believe that if you are looking to the key performance indicators of Hungary over the last years, this is a success story as we don't have seen it in many other countries. Maybe Poland is as well on a very good level, but Hungary has outstanding dynamics in the last years. And I believe this was in the benefit for everybody. This was in the benefit for Hungary. This was as well in the benefit for many companies investing with a lot of money for FDIs in Hungary. I believe that Hungary today has an outstanding position if it comes not only to the Visegrad countries, but as well overall when it comes to globalization and internationalization of business activities in the world. And everybody is always talking about China and the US and how much Germany could be linked even more or even less if it comes to troubles or to advantages looking to China and to the United States. But a lot of people forget that for German business, the Visegrad countries are more important as far as trade relations are concerned than China and the US. So for us, this part of the world and with the outstanding dynamics of Hungary are key. Second, coming back to Robert's statement, I believe that Hungary, and this is a point which you were raising in your question, Hungary has shown in the last 5 to 10 years unbelievable dynamics if it comes to the positioning of the country for new technology. And the three clusters you mentioned are just reflecting this in the way for our future. I believe that Hungary will be very well placed and maybe much better placed than some other countries around the world if it comes to a downturn in the international business environment. Because you are pushing now modern technology, you are pushing digitalization, IT, software, AI, everything which is really characterizing a new world of dynamics. You have a spirit in the country which is outstanding. So I believe really that Hungary is very well prepared for the future. And let me still add one other point. I believe that the numbers are the numbers, and the numbers are reflecting a very strong move forward in the Hungarian economy and as well in politics over the last years. Maybe that the new EU Commission would be good advised to look closer to Hungary as a positive sign of economic development in the future than it has done in the past. But as far as business is concerned, if you are looking around the automotive industry and the undergoing changes in this industry, the new scope of the automotive industry will be very much linked with AI, with autonomous driving, with digitalization. Hungary has already started 4 years ago to have a very close look to the changes and to the change of paradigm in the automotive industry. And you have been, as far as I see, one of the first countries looking very closely to what will be the consequences for a new scope of the automotive industry. And I believe that you have a spirit of change. You have skilled people, which is a huge asset in Hungary. You have skilled people. You have not enough people, but you have skilled people to face the challenges for the next years. So I believe really that Hungary is very well placed for future, and the spirit of young people, entrepreneurship, technology orientation, open for change are characterizing, I believe, a generation which is very promising to build a next step for the future of this country.
Thank you. I have seen one of the last speeches of Viktor Orbán, the Prime Minister, and he says in his speech, Hungary today is on a promising course, or he said, Hungary today is on a path that gives reason for hope. I think it was very, very modest what he said, because I think Hungary has a lot of reasons for hope. But I know there's a problem. If you have plants and so on, the crafts you could have there, the people who could engage there in this. You need more people, I think.
Look, as I told you, we have started back 9 years ago with 12.5% unemployment rate, which has now been reduced to 3.3%. According to the study books of economic science, this is very close to, or even already arrived to, full employment. 4.5 million people at work. We know that the limit is somewhere around 4.5 to 5 million. I mean, the number of people on the work of whose we can count on. So that's why we have shifted our economic policies focus now, because we simply don't want to overheat the economy. We don't want to end up in a situation where we would need the work of 6 million people, because we don't have that number. So we have to be aware that between 4.5 and 5 million people, we have the available labor force. And in order to adjust ourselves to this situation, as of today, we have introduced and implement a new system for cash subsidies when it comes to investments. Many of the companies represented here in the room have been involved in negotiations with us, and then took the benefit of those negotiations in the form of cash incentive. We have a very wide variety of that. In 12 out of 18 counties of the country, the cash incentive and the financial package to incentivize the given investment of the company can reach 50% of the volume of the investment. In 3 counties, 35%, and in another 3 counties, 25%. And so far, the basis of our calculation about the size of the cash incentive within the financial package was based on the number of new jobs to be created. And then, you know, additional revenue for the budget through the tax paid in by the company itself and by the employers, and as an outcome of growing consumption and growing revenues of the company. But now, with the new system implemented as of today, we eliminate the obligation of job creation from the preconditions of eligibility to cash incentive. So from today onwards, if companies in Hungary introduce new technologies, bring in new machinery, introduce new processes in order to maintain or upgrade the competitiveness of that given country, without creating any new job, are eligible for the same cash incentive, up to 50% of the volume of the investment. I think this is the key, because now the focus is not on creating a robust number of new jobs. The focus is on increasing or enhancing the level of technology enhancing the added value, and enhancing or increasing the R&D share of the already existing jobs. Whatever you spend on R&D in Hungary, twice as much will be deducted from your corporate tax base. If you employ your colleagues on R&D jobs, you are exempt from paying half of the social tax. We understand that we need to cut the tax burden on labor on a continuous basis. In Hungary, salaries are growing, which is great news, and we want to see it continuing. But we know that we have to cut the tax burden on labor on a continuous basis. So, in the last 3 years, we have cut the social tax to be paid by the employer by almost 10% within 3 years. 3 years ago, the tax rate was 27%. Then we cut it to 22%. Last year, we cut it to 19.5%. And this year, as of 1st of July, we have cut it to 17.5%. To help competitiveness and to help companies to further increase the salaries and to help companies to bring in more jobs with higher added value, with higher R&D share, and a higher level of technology, because this is the goal of ours. This is the goal of ours now, to enhance the competitiveness, enhance the productivity, and enhance the technological level.
We have in Germany the Made in Germany, and you have in the meantime Made in Hungary. And I know that a lot of the things which we say made in Germany, they are made in Hungary, I think.
Yeah, actually, what Klaus, Mr. Professor has said, that Central Europe has a huge role in German economy and trade. Let me give you just one figure. When it comes to the last year's figure, 2018, the trade between Germany and the 4 Visegrad countries was 73% higher than the German-French trade.
Yeah.
Just in order to show the tightness of our cooperation.
Yeah. You want to say something?
No, I believe really what Peter was explaining is the tools for the future in pushing forward technology is paving the way for the next success story of Hungary. Because I believe it reflects that you are pushing forward technology, that you are pushing forward everything which is linked with digitalization. And I believe that Hungary is so well positioned if you take a value chain of a company which is strongly diversified in production. You have so many tools, you have a good infrastructure, you have reasonable pricing of labor. Still, I believe this is the point one has to be a little bit careful in the future to have the right balance between the increase of wages and the increase of productivity and efficiency. But everything else, I believe, speaks in favor of this country. And if you are looking then to the spirit of technology, where do I find this? In the tools actually of other countries in such a decisive role and such a decisive description to move forward. And I believe this reflects this entrepreneurial spirit and reflects as well the way how Hungary wants to go in the future. And I believe Hungary has such a strong position for German industry. Look to the investments. Look to the people who are really looking forward to work here, but not expats, but pushing forward young people educated very well in the country and afterwards for some professional training in German companies. This is, I believe, something which I believe is making Hungary extremely attractive. And there is only one country, I feel, where you have a similar dynamic attitude in Europe today. This might be Poland. But you are much more decisive and more consequent if it comes to the execution of big ideas. And in life and in business, not the big strategy is normally very much describing what you have to do, but everything is about execution. And if it comes to, as well to the soft factors, speed of decision taking, a willingness to be open and welcoming foreign investors, if I see how you and how your colleagues are browsing around the world to look forward to have FDIs in the country. I believe, I do not see this in many other places in this world.
First, he makes a very good PR for Hungary, I must say. Thank you so much. And second, I would say, the Hungarians, I think, they have special skills and they have a special DNA, I think. So it is well.
Yes, yes.
Can I just say one thing on that? Because you say that we are browsing all around the world. When I took over the office as a foreign minister and I made this shift in our foreign policy that we are economy focused, I made it very clear to my ambassadors that the judgment of their performance is no longer based on the number of receptions they take part. Because there are figures. Because foreign affairs was not measurable by figures before, but now as we have external economic relations and foreign affairs, now there are figures. And I made it very clear to all my ambassadors that, and of course it's not the same expectation towards my ambassador in Nairobi and in Berlin, for example, so I'm more sophisticated than that, but I have the expectation to all of them to be, to be aware of all companies in their country having the intention to invest in Europe. Immediately grab them, bring here, give them the offer, tell them, what we can offer. On the other hand, when it comes to Hungarian companies being able to invest, to bring export products to that given country, they have to help them. And then, I was almost stabbed in the back for at least half a year, because they said that number one, I never was a diplomat, which is true. I could be their son, it is true, but, and I don't know anything about this, and I downgrade them as merchandisers. And I said, you're right, but this is an upgrade. Because the goal of foreign policy at the end must be to verify the national interest. And what can be the national interest more than creating jobs for the Hungarian people? And on the other hand, what Klaus says here about decision making. I have to tell you that many of you who come from abroad and try to get some information about our country from newspapers, I'm really surprised that you are still here. Because the issue of quick decision making is not coming out from scratch. It comes from political stability. And there are only two countries in Europe where there's a government without any kind of obligation to make coalition: Poland and Hungary. And in Hungary, we have won the last 3 national elections in 2010, 14 and 18 with a 2/3 majority. So in our parliament, there's only one party which occupies 2/3 of the seats. That makes it possible to make quick decisions and avoid stupid debates which are time-consuming and lead nowhere. And of course, this is portrayed in the western part of Europe and in the United States, in media and sometimes political leaders, as a dictatorship. But come on, if you say something like that about Hungary, means that you insult the Hungarian people because you don't take them mature enough, you don't consider mature enough to make their own decisions about the future of their own country. In Hungary, this situation that one party has 2/3 majority in the parliament for the 3rd consecutive term is based on the will of the people, because this is an outcome of an election. People went to vote, and like last year, there was a record turnout, and the ruling party got the record support. So criticizing Hungary for such a political stability means totally disrespect to the will of the Hungarian people. Here the Hungarian people decided. Since the autumn of 2006, there were 9 elections held in Hungary. 3 times national, 3 times European Parliament, 3 times local. All 9 were won by a huge margin by the ruling party. That cannot be an accident. And that gives us the opportunity to make quick decisions, to avoid long, stupid debates, and to be flexible.
May I just add one point? You were, for good reasons, describing the situation 30 years ago, and not to forget this.
Yeah.
But if you compare what happened in the 30 years, everybody was looking to Hungary as a place for cheap production, cheap labor costs, cheap low wages and everything. Today, I believe this is not the reason why people are going to Hungary. They are going here because they find well-educated people, because they see trained people, because they see excellent logistics, which is so important for a diversified global company in this world. And I believe this makes today the assets of Hungary. And if you are looking as well to local content, which is today something very important for international companies where they have to produce, I believe that in the early 90s, we were talking about a local content of 10%.
Yeah.
Today, you are talking about a local content of 85 or 90%. So this means how fast it was possible to upgrade the whole business community in a way to produce all what you need to more or less 80-90% in the country. There is only one point I would like to be careful about. This is a brain drain. The brain drain in Central Eastern Europe has not been stopped up to now. And listening to the remarks of your Minister of Education a couple of weeks ago, saying that most probably you are losing another 300,000 people in the next 10 years. I don't know if this number is right, but it has been communicated in the media. I believe this is something where Hungary should be very, very careful in having a clear perspective for young people to stay in the country and not to move away. You are better positioned than Romania and Bulgaria, certainly. But nevertheless, I believe brain drain is certainly a very, very important challenge.
Minister.
Yeah, one reaction on that, Klaus. Last year was the first year ever that there were more people returning to the country than leaving for the sake of employment. And I really do believe that the best way to attract young people, or not young people, back to Hungary is big brands and jobs offered by them. The first success story of ours comes with BlackRock. Right after we have introduced the 9% flat tax on corporate income, maybe that's just a coincidence, we made an agreement with BlackRock about establishing their global development center here in Budapest. Then we went for a job fair in London with BlackRock together, and like within the first 1 hour, there were around 100 young Hungarians working in London, applying for a job by BlackRock in Budapest. You know, and since that first very successful story, we are making with the others, with Morgan Stanley, with Citi, with Audi, with all other companies, we are making job fairs on our embassies where a big Hungarian community is living, and you cannot imagine the enthusiasm that people are applying for jobs and they can come back home. Because as the wages have been increased by 70%, net and average, 70% in the last 9 years, this is a total different dimension. It makes sense to come back.
But you must know, I have seen very often people outside, people in USA and so on, which are coming from Hungary. Very, very famous people, Nobel Prize.
We are a global nation.
Yes, so it is. And therefore, I think people come back. Not all, but a lot of people will come back, and therefore, I have a lot of hope. But you should say that you are one of the main men who did a lot that we have catch-commit with Mercedes here in Hungary. He was one of the men who had seen very early the chances of this country and the possibilities of this country, and therefore, in this place, also many thanks. You have spoken about bashing of Hungary. I think it's really a big problem, and there's a lot to do. Because some years ago, I said in nearly the same discussion, you must be successful. You must show that you are the greatest under the former Eastern Bloc states. And you must show you are the king. And I was believing this. But in the meantime, I see Hungary has a lot of success. The history of Hungary, especially the last 10 years with Viktor Orban, it's a success story, I must say. And always, I'm coming to Brussels, I'm coming to Vienna, and always the same things are said. You must more and more successful, I would now say, that this bashing will have an end. I can't understand it, because the most of these critics have not a real case.
Well, Minister, this is politics.
I know politics. Yes.
We are under a political attack. But thanks God, those who make the important decisions about Hungary, namely either invest or not, they usually come here and look around. And do not get the information only from newspapers or media reports or television or even from some very distinguished European politicians. Look, what I can tell you, figures are telling. Yeah. Figures are telling. Yeah. In the last 5 years, at the end of every year, as I told you, we have broken the all-time investment records year by year and the all-time export records year by year. Last year, we had 98 major investments arriving to this country through the investment incentivizing system. They brought around 4.3 billion euros of investment, created 17,000 new jobs. That was the absolute record so far. The figures of the first half of this year are even better than that. Yeah. Even better than that. 2.4 billion euros of investment. Why? Because these people who make the real decisions, you know, not just, you know, blowing communication balloons, making the real decisions. They come here, look around, and then they understand that this is the right place to invest. May I say you one more thing, because you mentioned Mercedes and you mentioned Klaus's role in attracting Mercedes or Daimler to come to Hungary. Currently, the automotive sector plays the most important role, kind of a backbone in our national economy. 29.9% of our industrial output comes from the automotive sector. There are 175,000 people working in this sector. And what proves the competitiveness of that is that 90.4% of all products and services produced in the automotive sector are exported. Yeah. And we understood that there's a totally new age of automotive industry coming up. So it's about autonomous driving and it's about electromobility. And we have made the necessary circumstances in order to be able to attract those investments. You have spoken about, Klaus, you have spoken about technology. We are 2 years ahead of the digital agenda of the European Union. There's a more than 91% coverage for 4G and 4G+, and Deutsche Telekom has already, by the way with Huawei, developed the first 5G system. You know, when American and Western European colleagues come to us and they criticize the presence of Huawei in Hungary, I always tell them, look, there are two companies who contracted them to be in Hungary. One is called Deutsche Telekom and the other one is Vodafone. So have a safe journey to Berlin or London to raise your questions. So, you know, because in Hungary, regardless of your nationality, there's no discrimination against companies. There's only one issue based on which you are judged, whether you respect the laws or not. And that's it. So back to automotive and back to electromobility. This first half of 2019 is the first half year ever that it's not the German companies to invest the most in Hungary, but the Koreans. Because the Koreans are leading the pace of the change or the shift of the automotive industry. When it comes to e-mobility, Samsung SDI is now building the biggest electric battery factory of the world in Hungary. So we will be in a position that the biggest combustion engine factory of the world, operated by Audi, is in Hungary, and we will have the biggest electric battery factory operated by Samsung SDI to be in Hungary. And not to speak about SK Innovation, Doosan, Shinyoung, Inzi Controls, they all decided, Koreans, they all decided just recently to establish their facilities here in Hungary. Because as you said, or as I said to your question, now it's not about the number of the new jobs, but the technological level. And since we have such a tradition in automotive, we elevate the technological level and we come to electromobility.
But say a little bit about South Korea and especially about China. What you have there in your plannings about the contacts and investments and so on?
Look, first of all, I want to say that we welcome the Chinese investments in Hungary. And don't be hypocritical. Don't be hypocritical. Because the 16 major Chinese investments we have here in Hungary, 16, 11 of them are outcomes of global takeovers. Huh? When Chinese companies bought either German or American or Canadian or Swiss companies, what can I do with that? I always raise this question to my Western European colleagues. Don't be hypocritical. Because if the French and the Germans are happy with selling I don't know how many hundreds of Airbus aircrafts to China, then don't bash a country which has 1.3% share of the EU-China trade. Yeah. And you know, speaking about China as something not modern, as something coming from the past, to be honest, it's simply stupid. You know, I mean, the Chinese are delivering technology, very highly developed technology. And if the question is whether we are interested in attracting the Chinese investors to come to Hungary, to implement their highly developed technologies here, thus contribute to the competitiveness of the economy, my answer is yes. And when we are bashed, then I raise the question, is it right that one of the biggest German locomotive manufacturing companies, which have around 20–25% of share of European market, is now being sold to the Chinese? So what are we speaking about it? What are we speaking about? So until big German, French, American companies are being sold to the Chinese, don't bash countries with 10 million people with 1.3% share of EU-China trade. That's my position.
Thanks. Mr. Mangold.
As far as China is concerned, I believe that we should handle China as an economy, as open as possible, and to accept Chinese investments. I am not a friend of the German legislation, which is limiting certain strategic acquisitions from Chinese or other companies in our market. Why should an owner, when he takes a decision to sell his business, not sell to a Chinese company? We are doing this as well to all other parts of the world. So let's be open to Chinese investments. And I only expecting one thing, that we are as welcome in China as we are welcoming them in Europe. This is, I believe, something we must make sure. But I'm sure that they are contributing a lot in the dynamics of a very open, competitive society. So why shouldn't they make business in our countries when we are investing much more in China than they are doing in Europe? So I believe really this is something we have to be more open, to be proud what we have achieved, and say let's welcome them if they have to offer something which is good for our economy, and if there is a market, why not? And we should be proud about that they are investing in Europe and not investing in other parts of the world, and bringing us additional technology and market size. So why should we limit their investments?
And it's including Dubai, yes?
Yes, certainly. Why not?
Okay.
Why not?
Okay.
As long as the money is clean, and as long as they respect the rules of the game for corporate governance, for compliance, and so on, I believe that we have an interest in a global economy to be open as much as we can to welcome them.
You see it in the same way?
So, absolutely. We Hungarians have made so many decisions and implemented so many measures in order to be competitive. You will hear from our Minister of Finance, who used to be Minister of National Economy, of our national economic decisions, with all the lowest tax rates, with all the infrastructural developments, with all the dual vocational training to be introduced both on higher education and secondary education level, in order to be able to include companies in the curriculum design as soon as possible, to produce a competitive labor force as quickly as it is just possible, that we have nothing to be afraid of. So we are interested in free global trade, because the less obstacles there are, is the better for us. And that's why we don't like those proposals which are very socialistic and coming from the western part of Europe on tax harmonization, for example. Why should we increase our taxes? Low tax rates are not coming from scratch. In order to be able to implement the lowest tax rates of Europe, which is the case of Hungary, you have to be extremely strict and disciplined on fiscal and budgetary issues. Look, this country has been reducing its state debt in the last 9 years, year by year, from 85% back in 2010 to around 70% currently. As I told you, in 2010 we had 7% of budget deficit. Now the minister will tell you that this year he has proposed a budget with 1% deficit. And we adopt our budget always in July, but not for that given year, for the next year. We are the only one, I think, in the globe, only country which makes that, to have the budget already in July for the next year, in order to be predictable. So free trade for us is extremely important. And you know, we always avoid and ask our colleagues to avoid the confusion of politics, trade, or economy. Because whenever politics is being confused there, it's gonna be tough. I just give you one last figure, if you don't mind.
Okay.
When it comes to the sanctions against Russia in the European Union, okay? Look at the outcome. Look at three figures of last 3 years. German-Russia trade has increased by 20%. France-Russia trade increased by 41%. Portugal-Russia trade increased by 88%, okay? And look at the Central European economies. We have lost $8 billion of export opportunities since the sanctions have been in place. So what happened? The Russians have developed their import replacement industries. Western European companies made enormous profits. Central Europeans were pushed out. So that's why we don't like politics and trade to be confused, because we are interested in free trade, because we have made so many efforts in order to be competitive. And as a country, which once again I'm telling you, number 92 in population, is number 34 in exports. And that's why our interest is not to restrict us from trading globally. We understand that unity of European Union is very important. That's why we never vetoed the Russian sanctions. We will line up with the majority, always, of course. But when it comes to, let's say, hypocrisy and political correctness left behind, these are the true facts.
We have to see our time. I would say a last sentence. Before our conference, before the start, you said a better time it could not be for this conference and for this event here.
Yes, because I believe actually we are going through some turbulences in the big global picture. Protectionism is increasing. The tendency to be orientated in nationalistic decisions, I believe, is something where we have to fight against. And to use this forum of today as well as a platform to show in which way we feel integrated in a big global business system is, I believe, the right moment to do. And I believe as well that we see that the dynamics as far as technology is concerned, with AI, with digitalization, I believe are a good sign to show in which way we can cooperate in a European international level. This is the reason why I believe that the timing is excellent for doing this today.
And your wishes for Hungary and the perspective of economics and technologies and so on?
Well, we have a very clear target to be above the European average growth by 2%. And so far we see that it's absolutely sustainable. Last year's growth figure was 5%, first half of this year 5.1%. We are fighting for the first place in the European Union when it comes to GDP growth. Back in 2010 we were the last ones, so this is the perspective.
And you can see we can have more than hope, because it's a very good way. We see Hungary and much success for you and your job and your government.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. I have seen you yesterday evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank. Vielen Dank, Klaus. Das war sehr gut.
Ja, schön.